Congratulations. This is the end of the cleanse. For those of you who made the 21 days, I congratulate you. You went through your cleaning the house, the evicting of the old tenants, and then the repopulating with the new. So on slide one here, um, some of you were likely still confused about where to go from here. Some of you are happy to be done, and now I'm questioning, are you actually happy? And my freedom, my teacher talked a bit about freedom, and we talk a lot about I'll feel free when this happens, or I'll feel happy when this happens, and it's often freedom from, like freedom from this cleanse, or freedom from my cravings. But it's when we're actually free to feel that we're the most free, because then in the state of like how life is, this moment's happening, and all of its richness, all the horrible things, all the great things, all the bright things, all the dark things, and they're happening. And some people's view of the divine is that this moment is the only thing that's divine because everything's happening within the present moment. So in the context of the cleanse, can you feel the places of shame and all the bad stuff we talked about there without running away? And can you be happy without needing anything to make you happy, quote unquote? It's a rhetorical question. I'm not here to answer it. And we can go now to slide two. So Noel just left me a message, and I've been studying alchemy now more formally for the last few months. And Paracelsus is considered the father of modern day alchemy. He lived over 500 years ago, and 600 years ago. And so he is what we're doing is alchemical distillation in our gut. And we need to chew our food. We need to chew it to break it down so we can distill out the parts. So we have a whole food, like say that's a piece of food. We're going to break it down to all of its thousands and jillions of little parts. Our body takes in what it needs and then it reassembles them. So we need the right parts, we need the right refining process, and we need to bring them back together in an ideal time and place. Slide three. And that's how we do it. Slide three is we choose things, or some people, I had a friend in college that kind of, wow, we were shopping for our natural food restaurant. And at the time, and I was looking at some vegetables, and he said, you know, it'd be funny if these are choosing us and we feel drawn to them. And to back that up, he often would challenge me in the way I thought about things. So we were talking about later on this discussion about, oh, I've been thinking about this person. And he said, well, what if they're thinking about you? And it's concurrent. So when he challenged me that when somebody pops up in my brain, to call them. And so we did an experiment for a few months where every time somebody popped into our brain, we called them as much as we can. And the ones we got a hold of on the phone, 9 times out of 10 said, oh, that's funny. I was just thinking about you. So it's, oh my goodness, you know, the field. So do we choose our thoughts or do they choose us? And who's at the center of all this? And anyways, on a lesser note, you know, I have plant allies that I call myself, and I do believe that they've chosen me in a sense to bring them into the world more. And if you look at plants, they're actually kind of more highly evolved than humans, the way they reproduce things, if you watch how they actually work. And so then we choose foods, then they choose us, and then we prepare foods. That could be even fermentation or raw or various ways. And then we chew foods, and then on down the list. And then at the end, we let go. And you look at how some of these are my statements, and some of these are from Chinese medicine. I believe our stomach, I usually know within an hour after I eat a meal how fine its finest essence is by how much energy I have. And I can usually tell pretty quick because I'm pretty clean and pretty sensitive. And there's a downside to that too. And my hope for each of you is that you become that too, so you can tell like that's not working for me. Like, cause I pretty much know cucumbers and summer squash, you know, they don't really work for me, and they're considered healthy. And then there's a lot of other things too that don't work for me, like legumes and grains anymore. They did at one point, and that's where we're going to talk about this later on in terms of shape-shifting microbes. What works for us at one point in our life may not work for us later on. And so keep that in mind, that don't stay stuck on anything. There's a time, I'm sure, in my old age where I'll become vegetarian or vegan again, because I feel like that's of a higher vibration spiritually, but my body's going to be decaying away anyways. But as long as I'm here in a body and I want to be physically active and I'm not just a meditator, or I'm going to be eating meat, and of course the alkaline vegetables along with it. So slide 4. Here is I'm going to slide back and forth between slide 4 and 5. One of my Google searches for the image of Paracelsus um, in slide 2, you can see a picture of Paracelsus, and then slide 4 is another image that was alongside that. And it's quite a profound thing if you actually look into that. There's the lesser beings and the greater beings and all the forces of nature there, and the light and the dark. It's quite, I actually been thinking about making a poster of that. It's so profound. And so every native tradition, if you look at that, they had a sort of holistic view, and they were working with ways to detoxify and self-care, and then if we got out of balance, there were much easier ways to get back in balance. And so you look at like on the left there, the guy holding the sun, and the people on the right holding the moon, and then the weird character with the antlers, and the clouds, and the dark clouds and the bright clouds, and it's really kind of subtle. But the feminine and the masculine, there's all kinds of little subtle signs in there, and it's definitely worthy of identifying what in yourself is light and dark, and accepting the whole picture. Because modern medicine doesn't do that. It's the modern way of thinking is to isolate and separate, and you have all these specialists and things. So we're ending this cleanse and we're going back out into the world, and maybe not having the container of support. So there's another way to release the container is by setting up another container for yourself, even if it's just inside yourself or a cord of support around yourself. So your best foods moving forward, we're going to keep it real simple here, is on an ideal basis is, your fresh farmer's market vegetables or your own from your garden, cooked fresh. And if you need to do leftovers, I'd freeze them immediately. Overnight, maybe. I had a teacher that was pretty extreme about overnight greens, saying that they were somewhat toxic the next day. And some people believe that onions absorb a lot of toxins in the environment they're in. So if you put them in a plastic bag, or they absorb in that, or leave them out on the counter. Then your oils need to be raw. I'm not kidding there. Don't be doing a lot of cooked and refined oils. They're going to muck up your cellular machinery. And you can heat your saturated fats, but I wouldn't heat any other oils. I never cook in olive oil anymore, even. And then there's a lot of evidence that we need at least 50% raw foods. In the wintertime, you do your best there, because not a lot of raw food is going to work for you. And there are people that can't digest raw foods. So, and then a little bit of protein. Doesn't have to be animal protein. You can get some good vegetarian proteins out there. And, this depends on where you're at in your life. Definitely avoid flour foods of all sorts, especially unless it's fresh ground and you're doing it yourself. Most of your nuts out there are stale. And items on your sheet that we passed out, and if you're doing this over the internet, then you have a sheet, post purification pointers, and foods that cause waste you definitely want to avoid as much as possible, because they're going to bring your energy down and cause toxicity. And so we talk about slide 7 here, sticking to the plan, is coming back home to a foundational plan. And for me, it's like when I'm out of balance, I can tell because I'm looking at my tongue, I'm watching the whites of my eyes, I'm noticing my energy, how am I sleeping, how's my appetite for water and food and sex. And I've been sick a couple of times in 13 years, and I don't even think they were sicknesses, and more as much as they were just exhaustion and overwork and emotional stuff. And of course, drinking, smoking pot, whatever, sometimes that can make us sick too. And then I clean out my filters regularly, just like you clean your car's filters out. And so when I talk about cleansing regularly as mandatory, there are ways to cleanse that, and a few minutes worth is basically, you can cleanse every week. Skip dinner once a week and just have herbal tea. You can have one day a week, or the whole day where you just do liquids and set up a program that way, or one day a month. And then my personal program is about twice a year. I try and do a 21-day cleanse. Since I lead a lot of cleanses, I end up kind of participating in 3 or 4 cleanses a year, but it works for me. And I do a weekly coffee enema. Sometimes 2 or 3 weeks will pass, but my enemas are not even just a coffee. It's a 3 enema sequence of a clearing one with some herbs, or just salt and water if I'm in a hurry, then the coffee, and then the restoring one at the end, often with something green. And if I'm in a hurry, I'll just use liquid chlorophyll. But I take herbs out of my garden or wheatgrass, and fresh green juices are great, and a probiotic also in the last one to kind of re-inoculate the colon. So kind of but whether they stick or not, there's a lot of debate about that in my field. So that's what I mean by cleansing regularly, and they're often small, short little things we can do. And one of them is a liquid diet, and one of them is skipping, especially dinner. I don't recommend skipping breakfast and then having a huge dinner, but for some people that may work. I just don't see it clinically as working really well. I think it's better to have an empty stomach at night, especially because you can just have a big meal the next morning if you're super starving. But being in bed on an empty stomach, I think, has a lot of value. Slide 8. Now we're going to get into some of the things that, from the next 10 slides, basically, it's a bit continuation of the shape-shifting proposal theory that was from a website that I stumbled upon. And this isn't proven per se, but in practice, these people in Europe, this therapy, obviously has a lot of support, and they're highly regarded, and especially since from the link you can go to from the last PowerPoint, you can go and you check it out. So when we talk about a couple of the treatment strategies, we're going to go back into the actual discussion, but get enough minerals, get enough gut lining support. And my thing there is, I don't really agree with some of the things, the isolates they're taking, but I do think a good mineral supplement or whole foods and seaweed. They have L-glutamine down here. I think comfrey is a good plant base to that, and then molybdenum has some value. A friend of mine believes it helps chelate copper, I believe, but I haven't looked much into it personally. Then there's our intestinal mucosa. We're going to have vitamin A and D. They have their own, hypoallergenic diet, which doesn't include milk or dairy or eggs or nuts, which then if they also have them on a low meat diet, then they're on this low protein diet, and I don't think you can build much tissue on a low protein diet, so unless you're laying around a lot. So intestinal mucosa requires A and D, and really you're still looking at the whole system, and part of intestinal mucosa is also building up the flora. We have a lot of choices for building up the intestinal flora. They're interesting, and most largest takeaway here is they're using various homeopathics of penicillin, candida, an organism called Mucor racemosus, and Aspergillus niger. And they're homeopathic, and I'm just throwing it in there to the crowd that this is quite an interesting theory from a clinician's perspective. And then stimulating the immune system, we use herbs, and we use herbs in my practice and supplements, and they use a lot of homeopathics in this realm. So I'm not sure what to make there, but those highlighted points there are definitely, if you see somebody that's got Lyme's or really serious gut problems, you may want to actually point them in the direction of some of these radical homeopathics, and I'll be checking into this more in the future. You can rest assured. So this is more of a building the future kind of thing here. Slide 9. This is verbatim off of the link, and I'm going to just go through this really quickly on each slide, and we're going to have to have a part 2 in a minute. But slide 9. So we're talking about these low valence or these lower energy microbes, and when we do, the thing to take away here is that pleomorphism is a shape-shifting how microbes co-evolve with us, and so if we provide a terrain where they can, like we're sort of full of rot and waste, then we have microbes that love rot and waste living within us. That's the takeaway here on this page. So that's the takeaway on slide 9. Slide 10 talks about antibiotics, and the takeaway here is that you don't kill the bacteria because then you haven't dealt with the milieu, as they call it, or the terrain. So it just blocks the cycle, and then you're dealing with higher levels of adaptation and mutation, and it's going to be awfully hard to cure that. And then slide 11 we'll come back to on part 2. So this is part 1 ending of the small intestine week 5 cleanse, and look forward to talking to you in part 2 in just a minute.